This is the Mercedes-AMG C43, and on paper, it's quite an intriguing car. You see, most new models try to surpass the car that they replace in basically every key metric. But the C43, well, it's heavier, it has less capacity, fewer cylinders, and also less torque than the old C43. But all is not as it seems. As we will discover, this car actually has a few tricks lurking up its sleeve and also under the bonnet that make it a really interesting car. Before we get into the details though, if you're watching us on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also dive into the comments below, because I want to know what you guys think about the new Mercedes-AMG C43. Do you like how it looks? Are you intrigued by what's underneath the bonnet? There's an electric turbo underneath there, guys. It's really interesting. Dive into the comments and let me know. Let's start with the biggest and the most interesting change for this generation of C43, and that is the engine. Now, the old car used a 3-litre turbocharged V6, but we have downsized for this generation of C43. So we now have 2 litres and 4 cylinders to play with, but it is heavily turbocharged. And like I mentioned in the intro, that turbo is electrified, which Mercedes is making a huge deal about because it's using technology lifted directly from the F1 car, which is all concrete as we know. Basically, how it works is a really small electric motor has been mounted onto the shaft between the turbine and the compressor wheels, and it can spin up immediately before exhaust gases arrive. Basically, it promises to eliminate turbo lag, and it has also delivered a small spike in power as well. So we have 300 kilowatts from this 2-litre 4-cylinder, which is absolutely insane. Torque has dipped a little bit by 20 Newton meters to a total torque output of 500 Newton meters, which is still a lot. And because this car now uses a wet clutch 9-speed automatic, it has race start. And when you engage launch control, it'll race from 0 to 100 k's an hour in 4.6 seconds, which is pretty brisk. And one thing that I almost forgot to mention is that this 2-litre 4-cylinder is the same unit in the A45S, and that means that it's built using AMG's one man, one engine philosophy. Elsewhere, the design changes for this generation of C43 are actually quite subtle, but they result in a car that is really quite convincing. It's nice and aggressive and sporty without being too far over the top. So the key changes at the front are we get an AMG specific grille. We also get a new design treatment for the air intakes down here, and there is some active aero happening at the front as well. You see these little slots down here which are open at the moment. They flop open when the car needs extra cooling and slam shut when it doesn't. Globally, you have the choice of 3 different sizes for the wheels. 18 inches are standard, 19s and 20s are optional. We're probably going to get 20s as standard in Australia, knowing our market, but we'll see what happens there. This car is riding on the 20-inch wheels, and I just want to point out the alloy design for a second because I think it's really quite cool. You look at it and you think it's a standard 10-spoke design, but as you get closer, you actually notice that there are these sort of aero wheel treatments between the spokes, which, again, I think they look really cool. Do you like them? Let me know in the comments below. Down the side, I'm going to call out the turbo badge here because it's actually quite cool. It has electrified written underneath it because, again, we have an electric turbo. Lurking underneath the chassis is standard 4-wheel steering and also adaptive dampers. Now, it's going to be quite interesting to explore how that performs in the C43 because when we've driven that combo of chassis tech in Australia on the C300, it hasn't exactly been our favourite. We've actually preferred the passive setup, which strikes a sweeter balance between handling and comfort. But that might be different in this car, which has firmer and more focused suspension. Around the back, we also have a couple of AMG specific touches. So we've got this carbon-like boot spoiler, which is quite cool, especially on a white car. It's kind of got a stormtrooper effect happening, which I like. And we also get an AMG specific rear diffuser and, of course, quad exhausts. Now, this car is obviously a sedan, but the C43 also comes in a wagon body style. Unfortunately though, we're not going to get the wagon in Australia. And hey, look, don't blame me. Blame all of us because we didn't buy enough of them, but it is a really pretty looking thing and more practical. I wish we had them in Australia, but we don't. So that's what this car's like on the outside. Let's jump inside, see what the cabin's like. Inside, the new generation W206 C-Class really is a classy and tech-forward place to sit, and this C43 just continues the theme with some added sportiness. So that means we get some S-Class inspired touches, and this car feels really, really techy. Big screen, so we have this 11.9-inch sort of waterfall central screen, which is angled slightly towards the driver, and the infotainment system, the clarity of the graphics, the speed of the touchscreen, it's a real highlight for this car. It really does set it apart from its rivals from Audi and BMW. Now, the AMG specific touches, this is one of them. Big bucket seats with really big side bolsters. Now, there are a couple of different types of seats for the C43, and we don't know exactly yet which one we're going to get for Australia, but they are very comfortable, very supportive. The only thing I'd say is that the actual back insert does feel like it could use a little bit more padding, but otherwise they are very, very comfy. The other touch worth pointing out is this AMG specific steering wheel. It looks like an absolute command center. We have all sorts of functions that you can adjust on the quad spokes here for the steering wheel. But the thing I want to point out is these two dials which hang from the steering wheel spokes. On the left-hand side, this one can be configured to access any of the main functions that you like. And on the right-hand side, this one is how you adjust and cycle through your many, many drive modes, which range from individual, which is my favorite, comfort, sport, and sport plus. That dials up the aggression, allows you to change the aggressiveness of the chassis and the engine and also the exhaust. So, enough talking about this car. Let's go and see what it drives like and what it sounds like. So let's start with how the engine feels and also how it sounds. And it feels, well, it feels quite different, this car. It's certainly given the C43 a different character, and the engine feels quite highly strung and pretty sophisticated. I'll give you a quick example now. I think they've done a good job with the noise as well. We'll get to the noise in a second. Now, this engine is the same 2-litre unit that you get in an A45S. It's also going to be used in the upcoming C63 AMG, where apparently the combustion engine alone is going to produce 350 kilowatts. That is insane performance from an engine that has the same swept capacity as the size of milk carton that you pour on your cereal in the morning. It is absolutely crazy. In this car, the C43, 300 kilowatts on tap. Performance is, it is pretty brisk. This is a very fast car to hustle up a windy road like we're in today. 0 to 100, 4.6 seconds, and on the move, it feels seriously, seriously rapid. 9 gears to play with. Engine feels nice and eager and punchy, particularly in the mid-range, but it's also worth revving it all the way out to the 7,000 RPM redline. Now, I think they have done a good job with the exhaust. As you sort of cycle through the drive modes, you get more pops and bangs and theatrics, but they haven't over-egged the omelette, which is something I feared they might. I think that's really important for the type of customer that's going to buy this car. They want a car that feels aggressive and sporty, but not over the top, not overdone. So I think it strikes a nice balance in that regard when it comes to the noise. Oh! Yep, it is a very quick car. Now, we've got to talk about turbo lag, because that is the promise with this car, that the new electric turbo effectively removes it altogether. Has it done that? No, not entirely. There is still some lag there if you go looking for it, but most of the time it is a seriously impressive powertrain. It certainly doesn't feel like a small capacity engine with a huge turbocharger bolted to it. And I think what AMG was really looking to do was to have the response of a small turbocharger, but the performance of a large one. And when you measure it that way, I think this engine is really pretty successful. The rest of the dynamic package, well, it's kind of what you expect. This car is very grippy, it's very confidence-inspiring. We're rolling on Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres. That is a quality piece of rubber. The steering is you know, the speed is natural, it's quite accurate, doesn't quite have the level of feedback and connection that I'd like, but it's very trustworthy. You have confidence placing the front axle exactly where you want it. The car also feels nice and agile. I was kind of hoping it would feel a little lighter on its feet now that we've gone to a 4-cylinder engine instead of a 6-pot, but this car is actually 75 kilograms heavier than the previous C43, so it doesn't feel significantly lighter on its feet when you're sort of hustling it up a windy road, but it is quite accurate and it does feel quite agile, and part of that is down to the 4-wheel steering system. Sometimes 4-wheel steering can feel quite spooky, like a Renault Megane RS or even a Renault Megane GT. It sort of pivots quite aggressively behind your hips. Kind of makes you feel like the car is about to spin. You don't get any of that in this car. It doesn't feel spooky at all. It just adds a nice sense of agility. Now let's talk about the ride, because the 4-wheel steering and the adaptive dampers are two of the things that we weren't huge fans of on the C300 in Australia. Most of that was the dynamic dampers. In comfort, the car felt quite floaty, and sometimes it felt like it was a little out of sync with the road surface. Kind of like you were lying on a waterbed and somebody sat down on the end of it and the car kind of sort of bobbled up and down. But here in the C43 with its more aggressive suspension tune, I'm not really noticing any of that at all. Now the caveat to the ride quality really does need to apply here. Don't know how it's going to perform in Australia. We've got to really wait and see before we can give a definitive verdict on how this car rides. But here today, it's better than I was expecting. I was looking at those huge 20-inch alloys and sort of knowing how Mercs and performance-focused Mercs have ridden in the past, particularly the brutal C63. I thought this car might ride like a trolley jack, but it doesn't. There is sort of a decent level of compliance, and in comfort mode, the ride almost has sort of a languid loping quality, which I quite like. Another dynamic highlight worth pointing out is the braking performance of this car. We've got 370mm front brake discs clamped by 4-piston calipers, and the stopping power on offer is really quite potent, which gives you the confidence to hustle a car like this on a winding alpine road. The only real chink in the C43's armour that I've discovered so far, we've only been driving the car for about 30 minutes on the other side of the planet, so I can't wait to spend more time in this car when it eventually arrives in Australia early next year. But one weakness that I have noticed is the gearbox itself. It's a wet clutch 9-speed automatic, and that has provided things like race start, which gives you launch control, but driving this car around town through some really cute French villages, sort of at low speed, lots of stop-start stuff, there was quite a lot of drivetrain shunt and gearbox shunt, which can get a little bit unpleasant. Makes the whole car feel a little bit jerky and like you're doing a bad job of driving it, when actually it's the car just sort of getting stuck between what it thinks you want it to do and what you're actually asking it to do. It can feel a little bit clumsy at times. And even at sort of B-road speeds like we're at now, if you sort of come off the throttle and get back on the throttle, there's kind of a delay and then sort of a jerkiness that I wasn't expecting. You certainly don't get that kind of thing from a conventional torque converter automatic, which is nice and smooth. But in saying that, the C43 does feel like a nicely rounded, sophisticated, very complex car. It's quick, it's grippy, I think it sounds great, but importantly, it also retains a softer side to its personality. So when you dial it back into comfort mode, the ride has just enough compliance to feel supple, to use it every single day. There's not much tire noise, the cabin feels nice and quiet and refined. I think it kind of strikes the right balance between aggression and sportiness and everyday comfort and usability that a buyer of this kind of car is going to be looking for. As for when the C43 is going to arrive in Australia, well, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to explore this car in greater detail. It's due to arrive in Australia in the first half of 2023, but whether that transpires with all of the COVID delays and semiconductor shortages, we'll have to wait and see. I'm really looking forward to spending more time in it because, like I said, it's quite an intriguing car. Price-wise, I think we can expect a sticker of around $130,000, which is about 15 grand more than the previous car. That's kind of in step with the price rises that have happened with the rest of the C-Class range. But I think it's going to be quite successful for Mercedes-Benz in Australia, particularly given Australia's love of all things performance. So when it arrives, make sure you check back to our site to see what we think of it when we can spend more time behind the driver's seat.